Privyet, Druzia, I dobro pozvalet na moyo prvo video obozreni Fed Zarya 1A. That's right, everybody. Welcome to my video on the Fed Zarya 1A. The Zarya 1A is a 35mm rangefinder camera. It has no meter, a focal plane shutter, much in the same way that a Leica or a Zorky would have had, shutter speeds of 1/30th of a second to 1/500th of a second, as well as bulb. The flash sync speed on this is 1/30th of a second. The red N, right there, on the lens, the red N means that the lens is coated. So if you don't have that red N, your lens is not coated. Early models of this camera include a 15mm by 11mm viewfinder, with older models having a 15mm by 9mm viewfinder. It also appears that the early models had camera body serial numbers starting with 902 and later ones with 00, which means, if you're watching at home, 902. That and the slightly squarer shape of the viewfinder lets you know that this is an early model of the 1A. These were only sold in Russia originally, and you know that because the film speed indicator is in GOST, right here, GOST, from 22 to 180. That's the film speed, and we'll talk about that in the video, how to figure out what that means in ISO. Actually, it's in the script right now, so I guess we're going to do it right now. All right. So GOST. Now, it looks like rocked in English script, but that is not what that stands for, or that's not what that means. So if you're going to convert your GOST number to your ISO number, what you need to do is take the GOST number and multiply it by 115%. So for instance, that means 22 GOST, which is right here the slowest speed, is equivalent to 25 ISO. 180 GOST, which is the fastest speed setting that this camera has, is equivalent to 200 ISO. The target market for the Fed Zarya 1A would have been the lower tier market. Basically, this is a spec'd down Fed 2B. It lacked many of the features of the higher spec models and had a more limited shutter speed range. Also, it is only a viewfinder. There's no rangefinder mechanism built into it. It's an exceedingly simple camera in operation, in features, and design, and that also means, by the way, that it provides excellent reliability. These are exceptionally well made, being that they are sourced from reclaimed tank parts and made with the determination of hardy Russian factory workers. This is the only Fed camera that has an M39 mount and that lacks a rangefinder. So this is a unique offering in the Fed lineup in that it is an M39 viewfinder. This was produced by Fed, which stands for FE, I'm going to get this wrong. I'm going to apologize right now to all of my Russian viewers. It is F.E. Zerzinsky. I think I might have gotten that right. The D at the front of Zerzinsky being silent. And fun fact, that F.E. Zerzinsky was named for the guy who founded the predecessor organization to the KGB. This was made at Fed Kharkov, Ukraine, at a factory that was converted from an orphanage to a labor commune in the 1920s. So definitely nothing going on there that we today, looking back on it, would think of as being a human rights abuse. The years that this was produced were from 1958 to 1959, or 1959 to 1960, or 1959 to 1961. Sources conflicted on that, and the sources were all over the board. Most of the sources, including McCown's, indicate that this was made from 59 to 61. Now that said, McCown's also indicates that Zarya means dawn. So I fact-checked that, and I have a friend who grew up in Russia and speaks Russian natively, and I called him up and I was like, hey, what does that mean? And he said it means star. So who knows, but I'm going with Mikola. This was preceded by nothing really, as it appears to be a one-off camera option based on another model. It was concurrent with the Fed 2 Model D, and it was followed again by nothing, as it was based on another model, and they just didn't make a down-spec version of whatever future model camera came after the Fed 2D. All right, so as we do, let's take a look at the camera's features, starting with the top, well, technically sort of the front sides. Right here we have the strap lugs, which is where you would connect your strap so that you don't drop it on the ground. Here on the top, this is your film rewind knob. This is your flash cold shoe, or I should say accessory cold shoe, because this could hold a light meter, a rangefinder, or a flash. Zarya in Russian script. Shutter speed dial right here, what you would use to select your shutter speed. You might have a little trouble seeing it, but there's a little dot there next to the 50 or 60. The 60. That dot is your index. It tells you what shutter speed you've selected. Shutter release button and shutter lock. To lock the shutter, you push this down and turn it, and now you can't push the shutter. To unlock it, you push it down and turn it the other direction, and that unlocks it. This is your frame count ring right here. That little triangle is your index. This frame count ring is manually reset when you load film, and we'll see how to do that later in the video. This is your frame advance knob right here. Your ISO selection dial and your film memo dial. Okay, so let's go one thing. This doesn't have a built-in light meter, so none of this is going to affect how the camera works. This is just to remind you of what kind of film you have loaded. So what you would want to do is, let's say you're using a 25 ISO tungsten balanced film. You'd rotate the light bulb to 22 Gauss, like you said, is 25 ISO. I didn't pick one of the other ones because I don't have any of the other ones memorized. Okay, so then daylight balanced, or I would assume that's a symbol for, negative film, black and white. So at any rate, all this does is remind you of what you're using. On the camera's front, we have the flash PC socket, viewfinder window, and the lens mount, because the lens is removable. There we go, M39 lens mount. On the camera's back, we have another logo. I'm honestly not sure what that means. I assume it's the Fed logo. Viewfinder window, serial number. On the camera's bottom, we have a 3/8 16 tripod socket and the film back unlock mechanism right here. There's two of them. All you have to do to unlock it is rotate them in opposite directions, and now we can get inside of the camera. So while we are here, inside the camera, we have the film cassette chamber. These silver things are guide rails that help the film move through the camera easily and smoothly. Film take-up sprocket right here. Oh, this is your shutter curtain. This is where the actual photo will be taken. Film take-up spool. I am missing the take-up spool. That's why I haven't used this camera. And then on the back here, we have the film pressure plate. Now, as with many of these older cameras, this had a removable film spool, and it was a specialized component that I don't have. Anyway, we're going to do as much as we can with this camera without the film take-up spool. So we're going to really quickly jump. So while we have the camera back open, let's talk about loading film. It's an only limited amount that I can do here because I don't have that take-up spool. But if you do have it, you take the film, you load your new film into this chamber here, and you pull out a leader. Once you have your leader pulled out, you can now see how these film guide rails are here at the sprocket holes, and then the film pressure plate sandwiches up against here to keep this flat so that the light is properly focused. These little sprocket teeth grab those holes, and then the film is taken up in the take-up spool. I wonder, maybe I can fudge it and get away with doing this. Let's find out. I can't believe this is going to work. Okay. It is one thing consistently I find about Russian cameras is that even if something is wrong, it still works. All right, now we're going to close the back of the camera just like this. We're going to lock it in place by turning these the opposite direction and folding those little arms down. Now let's see if this holds up for more than a shot or two. So we're going to advance the film one turn. We're actually going to take the slack out of the film next. We'll know that the film is being taken up if this dial with the arrow moves in the direction opposite of the arrow. Holy cow, that is working. All right, we're going to advance it one more frame just to be on the safe side. Now what we're going to do is we're going to reset this frame counter because this is a frame counter we have to set ourselves. It is a downward counting frame counter. So if you have 36 frames in your camera, you just set this at 36. If you're using 27 or 24, you just set that at 27 or 24. We're going to go with a 24 frame for this one, let's say. And then you just keep taking photos and everything works happily, as if by magic. I'm actually kind of surprised by all that. So film is one and done. That means that film is one and done. That means it can record light a single time in a controlled manner that results in an image through a proper shutter speed, aperture, and with proper focus, or in an uncontrolled manner where the film absorbs every photon that reaches it, or as many as it possibly can. And you can have an uncontrolled exposure by doing this. So if you open up your film back when the film is out of the canister like this, all of the photos on it and all the photos it could possibly take will be erased. But I want to show you what happens when you take a photo with this camera. When you take a picture, the shutter curtain actuates, and that means it just does its thing, right? Then it triggers some mechanism here that allows you to advance the film. And there you go, you just advance the film. Like that, it pulls film out of the cassette, takes it over here, and the reason that the knob here turns in the opposite direction of the arrow is because there's a mechanical coupling where the film is pulling up against the center core of the cassette, which causes that to turn. Okay, really easy process right there. Great. So what do you want? How do you rewind your film? Good question. I don't remember a film rewind button. But if we try locking the shutter, there we go. It takes a picture when you go to lock it. But that's also, not just the lock, it's the rewind button. So now you rewind the button by pushing that down and just rewinding the film back into the cassette. Just like that. Then you take your used cassette out of your camera. Then you grab your new cassette and you drop your new cassette into the camera and just repeat the process. Or if you're done shooting for the day, you just put the back onto your camera and you're good to go. All right, so now that we've seen how to load film, let's talk about how to mount and replace lenses. This uses a standard M39 mount. So any M39 Leica thread mount M39 mount lens will work. M39 threaded and larger lenses will not give you proper focus. So you need a Leica thread mount M39 for this. To remove the lens, you just remove it by unscrewing counter or anti-clockwise. And then put the lens back in, to put a new lens back on, all you have to do is set it onto the mount and just start threading it clockwise until it grips. The threads go into the raceway and you can tighten it all the way down. That should thread on very easily. If it doesn't thread on very easily, back it out and try again, because that means you might have cross-threaded the lens. Let's talk about flash use with this camera. And now you can see here there's a flash PC port. There is no hot shoe. This is not a hot shoe. If you plug a flash into this, nothing's going to happen. The flash won't be powered. But this is a PC port, so if you have a modern flash PC socket cable will fit in this, and then you just connect it to your flash, and you can put your flash wherever you want. You could even just run a cable up to your cold shoe and mount your flash up here, because a flash will fit there, just won't be triggered by it. So let's talk a little bit about flash technique once you've gotten your cable to connect to here. The first thing is that your shutter speed for flash use is 1/30th of a second. So we're going to set the dial to 1/30th. Now the reason that it's 1/30th of a second is that focal plane curtains travel like this. When you push the shutter button, the first focal plane curtain opens, then the second curtain comes after it. When you advance the film, they go backwards like that. So if you're at 1/30th of a second, the first curtain opens, the entire film plane is exposed to the scene for about 1/30th of a second, and then the second curtain closes behind it, and then you advance and reset the curtains. Okay, but this has a 500th of a second shutter speed. What happens then? Well, with focal plane cameras, the shutter speed isn't controlled by how fast the curtain moves. It always moves at the same speed, but by how closely behind it the trailing curtain follows. So at 1/500th of a second, there's going to be a very thin gap between the two of them, maybe about like that. So what's going to happen is either here at the very beginning or here at the very end of your frame, you're going to get a thin strip of illuminated scene. Everything else will be blank because shutter curtain will be blocking the film when the flash is triggered, except for in that little gap. And that's true of 1/250th, 1/125th, and 1/60th, just with different sized gaps. So at 1/30th of a second and bulb, you can use a flash with this camera. Now, because you have to plug your cable into here, you can have the flash wherever you want. And like I said, the worst place to put your flash is right here on top of the camera, because the light will leave the flash, reach your subject, bounce back to the lens, and your subject will look very flat and very waxy. So there are some really good places to put your flash. Off the camera, pointing up at the ceiling. If you don't have a ceiling, pointing at a wall or a reflector is just fine as well. One of the reasons you want to try to get your light to go upward and then bounce down onto your subjects and then have them illuminated from above, and that's why a ceiling works very well for this, is because as humans, we're used to seeing everything lit from above, by the sun, by the lights in our homes, by the lights in our streets. Every place that we see someone, they're lit from above. So if you want to make somebody look natural and flatter them in their photos that you take of them, then you want to light them from above. One other note, this camera can use old flash bulbs. I assume that it can use a mix of FP and M bulbs with different shutter speed timings. However, I could not anywhere find a chart that provides the timings or which bulbs it can use and which shutter speeds. But effectively it's a moot point. Flash bulbs are highly uncommon, and you can still get them today, I think, but they are also expensive. The majority of you will use a flash that does not have a replaceable bulb, and that will the flashes that don't have a replaceable bulb have to be used at 1/30th of a second and slower. All right, so here we are looking at the top of the lens. Now, the focus ring is this ring right here, and as you adjust the focus, it will focus from infinity to 1 meter. This red line right here is your focus index. So that's going to tell you what your point of sharpest focus will be. So you can see now at infinity focus, the infinity mark lines up with that red triangle and line index. So that's pretty easy to use. Then here we've got this little red dot is your aperture index. So whatever aperture you are set at, you know it because that line lines up with the red dot, okay? Then here we have a set of scales, 22, 16, 11, 8, 5, 6, and a little unmarked 4, and then a 2, 8. And on the other side of the lens, we have the exact same thing in the opposite order. Those are your hyperfocal and zone focusing distance scales. So let's say that you're about to take a picture and you set your camera to f8, and your subject is 4 meters, no, we'll go with 3 meters away from you, okay? Reading this lens, everything from this f8 line down to this f8 line will be in focus. So roughly 2¼ to about 5 meters away will be in focus with this setting. Okay, but you know what? I goofed. I just realized I don't need f8. I need f2.8. Well, everything from f2.8 to f2.8 is in focus, which is around 2¾ to about 3½ meters will be in focus with this setting. Okay, well, I have a tripod and I want to take a really deep focus shot, okay? So I've got it set to infinity. There's some mountains in the background I want to get a photo of, and I want to get some of the foreground in focus too. So I'm going to set this all the way to f22 and take my picture. Well, wait, hold on, before you do that. Right now, if you do that, everything from infinity to as close as, let's call that 3 meters, is going to be in focus. Well, and that's pretty darn good, don't get me wrong. However, you can do better because everything on this side of the focus mark is wasted. So if we rotate the infinity focus until we line up with this far f22 over here, now everything from that 22 mark to this 22 mark will be in focus at f22. That's everything from 1.5 meters to infinity. That's a very deep depth of field that gives you to use with this lens. An impressively deep depth of field, I'm not going to lie. So the way that you use these scales on top are you figure out what aperture you're going to use, and then you figure out what your focus point is going to be, and then they tell you what is going to be in focus. But everything from what marked aperture here is what's going to be in focus in your image. All right, so now that we've gone over basically everything there is with the camera, let's put it all together and see how to take a photo with this camera. Okay, so first thing you're going to need is a light meter, either one on your smartphone in the form of an app or one that's handheld that you can use to take meter readings with. Okay, so we've got that. And we know that with our film, we are going to set the shutter speed to 1/125th of a second, and we're going to make sure, okay, that's advanced, so we're good to go. Then we're also going to look at the aperture, and it says f5.6. Oh, perfect, we were set to that already. We're going to find our focus point, and we're just going to, it's a viewfinder. It doesn't tell you how far away things are, so if you have a rangefinder mechanism up here, that can help a lot, or you can just kind of eyeball your scene and get pretty darn close. So we know that our subject is about 3.5 meters away. Now we're going to look through the viewfinder on the back, and we're going to compose the image as we want it to look, and we're going to take the picture. One thing to be very careful of when you take the picture is don't have your finger touch the shutter dial at the same time. And the reason is because this spins when you take a picture. If you didn't catch that, take a look here. And you should have been able to see that spin as I took the photo. Now, if your finger does catch that, it's not the end of the world. It's just going to cause your shutter curtains to hang up during the image, which will give you improper and uneven exposure across your image. Could also ruin your image. So that's how you take a photo. Dial in your settings, get your focus, line it up, and take a picture. Pretty easy. What about double exposures? You can't. This camera has double exposure prevention built into it. Most of the Leica mechanism clone cameras allow you to do it by taking your first photo and then rearming the shutter by rewinding the shutter dial in the opposite direction. This one does not let you rearm the shutter that way. You can only rearm the shutter by advancing the film. So, no double exposures with this camera. So some tips for using your Fed Zarya 1A. We're going to start right here on the top. The first thing is that you always want to arm your shutter before you adjust the shutter speed. Once you have it armed, then you can adjust the shutter speed. If you adjust the shutter speed prior to arming it, there is a chance that you could damage the gearing in the camera and brick the shutter. The other tip that I have for you with this camera is that, as with all interchangeable lens, viewfinder cameras that don't have a rangefinder in them, you can set yourself up for maximum success by using a wide-angle lens of the proper mount, because you'll get more in focus and a deeper depth of field at each aperture with a wider lens. That will also allow you basically to use this like a point-and-shoot travel camera. You can get precise focus with these, but you do need to take some good measurements first. So the widest angle M39 Russian lens was the MR2 20mm lens. There are wider non-Russian M39 lenses available which will work on this camera. And if you got a wider angle lens than the 50mm this comes with, and you were just to set it at the hyperfocal distance and shoot like you were a reporter on vacation or something like that, that would be about the simplest 35mm shooting experience you can get in a camera. So some things not to do with your camera. Don't store the camera with the shutter ready to fire. Always trigger your camera's shutter before you store it, even if it's just overnight. And that's especially true with older cameras because the springs on older cameras can become fatigued. And if your springs break, because these are mechanical shutters, so when you arm the shutter, all of this tension gets put onto the springs until they fire and release it. Well, if they get stored with that tension on the springs, they could develop a memory and become slower to compress, or contract rather, or they can just break. Either case will render your shutter timing either way off or make your shutter completely useless. So you always want to trigger your camera before storing it. You also don't want to touch the shutter on this camera if you can avoid it, because that is a way to damage the shutter and cause it to brick. Don't leave this camera in your car, because heat can damage the camera by causing the oils, the lubricating oils in the shutter mechanism, to get really thin and get places they shouldn't be. And then when they get back to their normal viscosity, they can just kind of mess things up. Cold can cause the lubricating oils to break down and become really gummy. Plus, a camera on your car's seat is a really good way to get a broken window and no camera. Don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box unless you have a really good rechargeable desiccant pack, and that's not the kind of desiccant pack that came with your winter coat this year. What I mean is one that can be popped into the oven to recharge and then be used over and over again to pull moisture out of your camera case. Also, don't let this get wet. It's not weather sealed, and the internal components are ferrous metal and they can rust, which will cause your camera to rust together and completely stop working. And just remember that your Fed Zarya 1A is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.